enlarged it. So is
Yeah.
that okay? And wait, yeah, okay, that's
perfect.
Yeah, because sometimes it's nice to see a few slides, and I added a few graphs from our book, and
That's excellent. So the students have already read the first part, the first chapter of your book.
yes.
And Kai, for the preparation of your presentation, so that they are well informed, at least important points, also topics, concepts in your book. I think they prepared also some questions to you then.
Yeah, and I will
for
upon the three important key aspects in the first chapter so that we can talk about it.
okay. Then should we start?
I'm fine, yeah.
Yes. So welcome again. Thank you, Dr. Anne Grüne, or I call her Anne, my friend, colleague, a good friend from University of Erfurt. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experiences, your book with us. And we have more than, I think, 100, 150 participants. It covers two courses taught by myself, mass communication and media convergence, and also communication and social transformations at the faculty. They are undergraduate students, and I should first introduce Dr. Anne Grüne. She is a research associate or a senior lecturer at the Department of Media and Communication Studies at University of Erfurt. Together with Professor Kai Hafiz, she works at the chair for international and comparative communication studies, right? And also study advisor and coordinator of the master's program, Global Communication, Politics and Society, which I'm probably say also being part of. And so for those of you that perhaps if you want to continue your study, a little bit promotion to Germany, you could then contact Dr. Grüne, then perhaps have an opportunity to study, to continue your study in University of Erfurt. And she is also a co-author of the book with Professor Kai Hafiz, again, Foundations of Global Communication, a conceptual handbook, which will be then described, explained, discussed also in this lecture. She is also reactivating again, I should say, her habilitation project or second thesis at the University of Erfurt also. So I wish you luck for your project as well. And we already had a bilateral cooperation project more than 10 years ago, 2015. We conducted cooperation between UNPAD and also Uni Erfurt, where some of our students and also staffs had exchanges, 12 students from UNPAD to Germany, and German Uni Erfurt student to Indonesia in the following years. No, vice versa. German students to Indonesia and also Indonesian students to Germany in 2016. And then concluded with an international conference in Bandung. At that time, we traveled also to Jakarta, to Parliament, which was really, really nice. We could relive again those occasions if we had time in the future, perhaps, as university partner. I would love to have you here personally, Anna, but you know, in this economy and what is happening between Germany and Indonesia, those in the Middle East, I think it will be risky, but who knows in the future, right? So yes, I think Dr. Anne Gruner, I would give you then the time and space for you then to present your lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Zubekti, for this kind invitation. And I hope everyone can hear me properly. Sorry, I cannot see all 100 students, since there is only this little field here at my screen. So I only see a couple of you, but it's really great to hear, and thank you for your interest. I hope I can meet your expectations, but that's really nice. And I hope we can exchange a few important ideas. As Subekti has said, it's, I think, very relevant these days to have these kinds of global exchanges. Yeah, so thanks for the invitation. Great to be back in Unpad, though not on site, as you said, but at least in virtual realms. Yeah, so I've been asked to discuss global communication.
Recording in progress.
That's what you already know. And yeah, this is what I will do in the upcoming approximately an hour or so. And I will talk about it both, let's say, explicitly and implicitly. So on maybe talking about the explicit layer of communication, global communication in my talk. So that's what you probably expect. I will reflect upon global communication theory a little bit. I will discuss the role of the media and the role of communication in everyday life in particular. So I will also try to tackle upon maybe the main three aspects in our book to understand global communication better. So that's one part of my talk. And when I planned and reflected on my talk, and Zobekti asked me to find a title, then I thought, okay, I considered the current situation in this world, with the superpowers in a way deteriorating, starting wars across the world. You see, disrespecting human rights and international order from so many angles in the world these days. And I also have a big concern about rising populism, not only in Europe, but across the world. And that also leads to a situation that more and more disrespects these ideas of mutual recognition, right, within and across countries. So it makes this narrative of us versus them again very strong. So yeah, in a way, I don't know how you feel, but the sentiments do no longer welcome globalization as a very positive vision of social change, right? It seems sometimes. And so it's rather about isolating and backsliding in terms of old nationalism. So I thought it might be good to have this in the background. So it's a good idea to reflect upon global communication, also against the backdrop of all these unresolved tensions in our world, because we could say paradoxically, many of today's backslidings, and you might also see some of them from Indonesian point of view, they in a way are also counterintuitive to other developments. Like if we talk about growing technical interconnectivity, right? We have more mobility than ever, worldwide trade, very complex interdependencies in a multipolar world. So simply, we can always simply ask ourselves, why aren't we becoming better together, right? Why aren't we becoming better on a global level? So this is something I would like to keep in mind when talking about global communication, that this bad image of globalization these days, as far as I experience it and observe it, it might also have something to do with the shortcomings of global communication, and these we need to better understand. And this is also some of our prospects in the book, to scan through all layers of global communication to better understand maybe also the shortcomings and, of course, on the other side, the potentials, because this is also just to understand my own position, my personal understanding, and my own normative conviction is still that globalization remains a progressive vision, and that we need to understand the potential also of exchanges, right? And this leads in a way to this implicit layer of my talk about global communication, because I think today we also enact global communication somehow ourselves. So in this very moment, I will talk to you, and hopefully I can also invite you to share a few of your perspectives. So I think that can be a very important aspect of global communication, you know, these forms of learning from one another. So of course, at first I will share my theoretical point of view, my own observations. However, I'm really, really interested to learn from your experiences and from your perspectives as well. So therefore, that's what exchange is all about. And so Bekti mentioned it, this specific exchange has started 10 years ago, right? And when we did the project together between UNPAD Bandung and the University of Erfurt. And we thought, okay, we should compare Germany and Indonesia in terms of political and social communication and transformation, right? This was to learn from seemingly asymmetrical international comparisons. So I think our project was very much driven by this idea: how can we learn from one another if we look for, not only differences but also similarities in, let's say, political transformation, in media developments, and social and cultural communication? Because sometimes what seems to differ at first glance can be very similar on a functional equivalent level later on. And I think we stumbled across a very interesting also global developments, like how do these countries deal with the digital public sphere, for example. We discussed issues such as social media, but also populism, political communication strategies. In this sense, right, from my perspective, it is always what can we learn from each other if we step outside our usual comparisons and our usual perspective and engage in more global dialogues. So I will talk about global communication, and actually, I hope we can also enact and do global communication in the upcoming few minutes, hours. So maybe let's start with these paradoxical situation I've already tackled upon again. And I prepared here a little slide where I ask you, what would you say? Would you agree with the fact that we live in a globalized world, or in a globally interconnected world? I assume that many of you feel that somehow we live in a global world, right? That's at least what my students usually tell me. They feel, of course, they have their smartphones, and we are very much connected with this world. And I think that is what also the early theoreticians or scholars, hyper-globalist scholars, so to say, started with, back in the days, in the millennium, so to say, around the millennium. Mainly Western scholars, they envisioned this globalized world. So what they all had in common was that they all proclaimed globalization to be an almighty phenomena, right? That's where these early days of globalization theory come from. They discussed time-space distanciation, deterritorialization, the end of the nation state, right? And they assumed that we are all becoming automatically maybe more cosmopolitan if we were just interconnected instantly, also based very much on this on the technical advancements in the ICT sector. You might also have heard or came across the global village idea by McLuhan, right? We do all live in a global village. So what we however, observed during the last, let's say, 2 decades is that these visions were probably a little too early and a little bit too, ethnocentric, maybe, and at least way too normative, right? Because reality draws a slightly different picture. So today, we know that these claims of a global reality in which everything becomes globally connected in a seemingly automatic way, were, I would say, way too optimistic. And now we can, of course, consider empirical data and our different observations that cannot confirm these very comprehensive forms of globalization, right? So what we observe is rather also differences and frictions and worldwide experiences with global developments. And we have a lot of indicators, so to say, for limits of globalization in all areas of society, of politics, and the media, right? So to give you just a few maybe examples, when we look at society or the level of global society, right? Personal connectivity, for example, is it has accelerated and increased in numbers. However, we shouldn't forget about the fact that still 1/3 about the global population is still offline if we follow the numbers by the UN, right? So that means that 30% of this worldwide population is not really part of this connectivity we are talking about. Then, if we look at the UN numbers of migration, also, although it seems an almighty phenomena these days, and migration increases. However, it's still a 3.5% of the world population that lives not in a country other than where people were born in, according to the UN statistics. Plus, we need to consider also internal migration. So therefore, also this phenomena of physical cross-border experiences is not a, let's say, a comprehensive phenomena all around the world. Also, if we look at tourism, right, so physical mobility, tourism is highly unevenly distributed across the world. Only a few people looking at the worldwide population, for example, arrive in African contexts, right? I think it made only up 5% of all tourist arrivals, whereas everyone seems to want to go to Paris, right? So there is also a huge imbalance here. And we can also ask ourselves who is really traveling across the world on an everyday level, right? So it's also very asymmetrical, we could say. And I also found it very interesting. A couple of years ago, I came across a study on the transnational character of German society, and you might also want to look for similar studies in Indonesia. And some scholars they were interested in international contexts of German society, and they found out that only nearly half of the Germans do not interact across borders actually on a regular level. So that means only half of the population has some kind of contact outside of Germany, which means that still many people remain locally bound, right? So they rather cross borders on a local level, but not on a global level. And if we look at social discourses, we also see, and that's maybe something you have also discussed in your courses already, Of course, although there are global issues like the climate change or human rights whatsoever, we still remain in our own discursive bubbles, right? So the question is whether things like yeah, let's say climate change are discussed in the same way at UNPAD as it is discussed as in the same way as at the University of Erfurt, right? So are we really connected? Even if we are interested in the same issues, we can ask ourselves. Yeah, these are just a few indicators, right, to reflect upon when we consider the state of the art of globalization in society. And the same can be done with, yeah, observing the media. I will tackle upon that later on. But just to give you a few hints here, you might have heard of the digital divide already. I already mentioned the asymmetric axis across the world. Yeah, so do we really meet our co-present audiences worldwide if we look at the same media content, right? So there is a lot of questions. At least I usually discuss with my students that we don't even have a globally produced newspaper, right? So we only have a few global media like CNN, Al Jazeera English, BBC maybe comes to your mind. They're still also somehow regionally bound. That's something we can discuss later on. But what about really global media, right? I can't really imagine one of those. I mean, we have New York Times, but it's not really a global newspaper, right? Where is our global newspaper? Hey, so there are, or where is our global social media hotspot, right? So we can ask a lot of those questions. So where are the platforms where we can really and actually meet globally, right? So therefore, we usually say, okay, even the internet, which we could discuss as a global, at least platform or media or however you want to put it, remains a kind of local medium. If we look at the usage, right? If we look at the languages, for example. So yeah, in a way, it's also not really a global platform. And if you look into other forms of media regulation or press freedom or journalistic ethics, you will find that we are not at a point where we could speak of globally shared standards, right? So there might be a few universal ideas, but when it comes, for example, to cosmopolitan ethics and journalism, we have a hard time to understand and find perfect definitions for that. Yeah, so this is also some limitations if we look at the media, and we will do so later on. And also politics. I mean, I already mentioned it. Politics is usually a very global system, in diplomacy. I mean, politicians are very good at global communication by profession, so to say. However, you see these differences between, let's say, local politics and yeah, maybe a weak global governance bodies, right? They are there. However, it's still yeah, we're still facing a world with that is very much grounded in local politics, and we see I mentioned all the backlashes earlier. So what we can start with is that on the one hand, we have to say, okay, globalization is an unfinished and tendentious and contested phenomena, right? So it has not really, in a way, succeeded, so to say. And Professor Harpers and me, we also speak of the two-speed globalization you might came across in my book. So that we say, okay, there are globalization phenomena, but at the same time, simultaneously, we also see localization, relocalization tendencies, right? So there is a lot of difficulty to understand these dynamics that are always a little bit back and forth and parallel, right? So ambivalent, we might say. Therefore, yeah, we say, okay, one of our core arguments in the book is to say we need to better understand both the strength and weakness of global interaction, right? And to understand these developments at various levels. So it's not enough to only look at the media, for example, but we need to better understand of how all actors in society really communicate across borders, because only then we do understand that it's probably not always working at all the levels all the time, right? So sometimes you as an individual might communicate globally and you might know about the world or another place much better than do local politics, for example, or vice versa, right? So therefore, there are a lot of frictions. So there are global knowledge dynamics, but on the other hand, it's also yeah, problems occurring at the same time. And this is something we want to understand more properly. Here I have a little summary about what I already told you. That's the individuals using the internet, right? These internet statistics. And as I said, we can look at it and say, wow, 70% are already interconnected or connected to the internet. But and I think, Subekti, that's also what you are interested in, right? The use of ICT. But what about these 30%, right? Can we just forget about them? No, we need to be aware of these trends, right? And yeah, I think I already tackled upon these other elements. Well, let's yeah, have a little look here at a quote from our book. So that's maybe something we can start with, or which summarizes what I already said. So globalization is in a way an interesting vision for the future, although it still seems unfinished and it is projected into the future. And therefore, that's also why, yeah, it has become a very tendentious political term. So there are advocates and opponents of globalization. So therefore, we need to better understand it. And as it's a very contested term also. And yeah, we as media and communication scholars, of course, we look at globalization from the angle of a communication analysis, right? And I usually start with considering, well, global communication, yeah, is that really a new phenomena? So let's start with some history, right? And I brought here a picture from early human history, the paintings, cave paintings, right? And some graffiti on the other side, as we will have to deal with tempus and technocentrism in the debate. I found that very interesting because if we consider, okay, maybe just with the advent of the internet, we can speak of global communication, right? That's sometimes kind of common sense that this is a new phenomena of our time. However, I read a wonderful article by Howard Frederick about the history of long distance communication. And he goes back in time and says, that's probably a little tempocentric, right? As humans always tried to share symbols with others across time and space. So even the paintball or the paintings at the walls in the early caves were probably messages for other groups who lived in other places at other times, right? And we can consider other forms of communication even beyond social media. We might think of early maybe smoke signs across borders, right? Or pigeons or human carriers. All the early civilizations, they had their postal services, for example, right? So there was a history of yeah, long distance or cross-border communication long before the advent of the internet. So what does that tell us? it for me, it tells us something also about the technocentrism when we discuss global communication. And what we try to do is to go beyond a mere perspective on, let's say, technical and mass mediated communication, and to integrate also other forms of communication, right? Like if we consider all forms of communication, also oral communication and text, visual signs, the debate becomes, of course, much more complex, and we can consider also different forms of communication. So that leads me to two different approaches to global communication, because there is this first one, and I try to illustrate it for you here a little bit. So we can look at global communication in technical terms. So that's the first understanding, right? So here we talk about just connectivity. So we are connected somehow as we do the same things, connectivity based on technical structures, right? So we are, we say in Germany, we are sitting in the same boat, right? So we all have our smartphones, we all do the same things somehow. Uh, so this is only one thing to highlight connectivity. However, we never know exactly what this connectivity really means or what people really do. And therefore, I think the second understanding is the one I'm much more interested in. And this is a definition that looks at it in more social terms, so highlighting the community aspect of global communication, which means to ask, what do we really do together, right? So do we steer the boat together, so to say, we are sitting in? So is there some kind of interconnection? And this leads me also to consider the etymology of communication. So I came across that and found it very interesting, as the Latin original term communicare means also to do something collectively, right? To share something with a community. So there is this, in communication, is this idea of community. So therefore, I think that's a very important characteristic. It's communication between actors who share a kind of common ground. So who belong to some kind of common social entity, right? And therefore, we need to look at how we really interact with one another, not just, on our screens, but also directly. So this brings together a key aspect about the modes of global communication. So we probably should consider not only the mediated realm and, the internet and mass media, so the imagined world of communication, but also the non-mediated aspect. So where do people really come together and perform, so to say, their dialogues? That's why we differentiate also between mediated and non-mediated forms, although this is more a heuristic differentiation. But I hope you understand what I would like to get across, right? To not focus only on, our media communication might help us better understand also the shortcomings of global communication. And of course, it gets even more complicated if we consider different forms of communication, as they also have different functions. For example, texts have different functions than visuals, or oral communication has a different function than texts, right? Since, consider diplomacy, for example, it usually needs some kind of hidden oral dialogue where you can really fix problems. However, if you talk to an audience, you can't say things which you can't, which you can do into these various functions of different forms of communications. But from this key aspect to consider different forms of communications, what is really important for us is this differentiation between discourse and dialogue. And maybe you stumbled across this when reading our introduction. So what's the idea of discourse? And I try to find pictures that illustrate it very well here. So usually also in media and communication studies, we discuss a lot discursive communication, right? So what do people do when they watch media, or when they actively engage with media? And this is more spreading knowledge, right? Observing others. Usually the discourse does not bring us really together. It just shares images worldwide. Whereas if you look at the second picture, of course, the dialogue is something, yeah, where we really create knowledge, right? We do not just share it and spread it, but it's about interaction, connectivity. So we really need to exchange our views, and therefore something you can probably also develop. And I think this differentiation is highly relevant for our understanding of global communication, because global communication can be enacted by global discourses. This is when we discuss global media agendas, for example. But what is also very interesting and very relevant for building a global world and a global community, we also need dialogue, right? So let's illustrate it maybe with looking at the mass media. And here I share this picture from our book where we try to illustrate this difference. So for example, when we take a look at the left side, the public sphere, so communication in a global public sphere, we might talk about a totally different phenomena than if we look at global dialogues, right, at the side of interaction. So let's talk about the global public sphere. So what you can see here is that usually, when we consider global communication in the public sphere, we are looking at these dynamics where different national media systems look at the same events and themes, right? So we can analyze, for example, how media in Germany or media in Indonesia currently discuss the phenomena of climate change, or how you interpret the ongoing wars in the world, like the war in Gaza, for example, and you will find differences. German media covers the war in Gaza for sure highly different than Indonesian media does. However, there might also be some similarities. So usually in this idea of the global public sphere, we can ask whether there is some kind of synchronicity between these different national public spheres, right? So if we talk with the same people, if we look at the same agendas, etc., then we can maybe speak about a kind of global public sphere. However, this doesn't tell us something about the audiences, who probably still stick or are stuck in their own interpretive bubbles. But that's where we usually analyze global agendas, global framing. Do we really see the world this in a similar way, right? And what we come across in our further analysis is, what is characteristic these days is that the media, the mass media, is still structured or still dependent on national media systems, right? And especially foreign coverage. I already mentioned it. We only rarely have global media hubs, so to say, where journalists, for example, from all around the world really work together Yeah, it might be in use of international communication flows like news media agencies or foreign correspondence, as I said, imports, exports. So there is some kind of exchange, of course, going on. However, it's usually stick to these national publics. Yeah, so therefore, one of our observations is that there is still potential at the side of the mass media. So this is still very much domestic, right? So if we look at mass media, we look at very domestic characteristics, and usually the media is also interdependent with local politics, with economic factors, and it's also dependent on local audiences, right? So usually media addresses specific kinds of audiences, and it's only, I can only imagine rare media institutions that really have in mind a global audience, right? So many of them only have in mind maybe a rather locally or regional or linguistic audience. Does not necessarily need to be a national audience, but somehow limited based on language or a region or whatsoever. Yeah, and we can discuss, of course, the potentials we can still work on here. Somehow people say, okay, but online communication has provided us all the means to add more interaction, right, in mass-mediated discourses. And of course, we've seen quite a lot of, yeah, emancipation dynamics. So there are, of course, voices that can raise or people, minority groups that can raise their voice with the help of social media, for example. So there is this democratic function on the one hand. However, what we also see today is that these platforms also lead to totally different dynamics. So do we really get into contact with others online, right? Have you found new friends online at another place in the world you've never known before, right? So there is some data indicating that also online we rather stick to our own locally defined bubbles and friendships, and we discuss, of course, a lot fragmentation and polarization. So also these, yeah, social media, yeah, in theory, it might offer ways for an alternative public sphere that can also be considered to be more global, but reality, it has not, let's say, yeah, realized in reality yet. Yeah, so therefore, on the other side, we need to discuss, okay, how are global dialogues to build a communicative global community are really enacted? So it needs also interaction between all social systems, the live words, and all actors in society, right? And that's maybe the key aspect too. We consider global communication not only in the mass media, but with a look at different actors in society. So on the one hand, we can look at social systems, and on the other hand, we can look at what we call the live worldly actors, you and me, you know, all individuals, small groups, but then also large communities. And although this is kind of simplified here, our actor-specific modes of communication, but imagine that all these actors, they have potential and limits to global communication. I already explained with the system of the mass media, right? Of course, mass media can observe so discursively very well the words. So we have journalists that, yeah, follow the news in the world, right? However, they're not that good in interaction. So even in German media, we rarely invite politicians from other European countries really to for example, show a really European debate, and I don't know about the Asian context in Asia, whether you have a lot of Australia in your public or in your mass media discourses, right? So media is not that good in interaction, but better in observation. Also, the politics, I already mentioned it, right? Uh, Politics can observe, that's what diplomacy does, right? However, yeah, really interaction happens usually of the individual. However, we as individuals, we are very good at exchange, right? So once we meet, we can really get into deep dialogue. So that's really the potential. If people really come together, then there is the chance, if we speak the same language, that we can really share ideas and exchange about the word and build a common understanding of the word, so to say. However, we are bad at, so to say, a systematic overview of the word, right? Because you and me, we can't really follow what's going on in the word on an everyday basis and in a systematic way. We can probably only follow the one friend we have in Indonesia. I might know a little bit more about Indonesia, yeah, because we had our exchange, and Subekti might know a little bit better about Germany. However, there are so many other places I've never been to and I don't have contacts to. So therefore, it's more in an yeah, so somehow we can be very good at individuals in global communication, but not on this systematic way. And therefore, we sometimes need the media to tell us what's going on in all these other places we don't have any contact with, right? And here I would like to share maybe the third key aspect of our in our book, and this has to do with global interdependence. As all these systems and life words we envision in our theory are also interconnected with one another, right? So that's what I try to explain with my examples. So of course we can discuss, if we look at us, at ourselves as individuals. Of course, what we are doing here right now is what we call a horizontal interdependence between the same actors, right? So we meet, we are individuals, and we have a little exchange on this horizontal level. So we do share our knowledge in this very moment with one another. It's in a way intergroup contact across borders, right? With the help of technology. However, I don't know if we do really share the same, let's say, images as you might have followed, your media system in Indonesia. I followed maybe some media in Germany, and here we are also in our understanding in a way dependent in a vertical level, interdependent with our national media. That's what I explained before, and it's also our politics, right? Or our school system. We might learn different things about the word in our schools. So I, for example, didn't came across a lot of things about Indonesia in my curriculum, right? And I don't know whether you learned a lot about Germany in school. And so you see that, of course, our individual experiences in global communication are in a way also linked to what happens in other systems and especially in the media. And we might also follow global media, right? That's when we talk about these global vertical interdependence. So if you, as an individual, follow, let's say, Al Jazeera English or BBC, right, then it's a very interesting interdependency between different actors across borders. However, we can also ask about how, and that's what I started with earlier on, this very question, how much are mass how much is mass media really interconnected with one another? Does German media really follow what happens in France, for example? What happens in Indonesia? Do they include all these things? Do they even exchange news and ideas, right? Or do they stick to their own system and just observe what's going on? And there's also a very in terms of journalism, of course, it makes a difference whether I just follow the news that comes in with the help of a news agency, or whether I really discuss with my friends on the ground, right? Or if I have my colleagues on the ground, because then I'm much more at the level of global dialogue. So, and this let's say, system, so to say, makes us understand why. I mean, fair enough. It's quite a complex a situation with all these vertical and horizontal interdependencies, right, and all these different actors. However, they help us to give us some kind of orientation, right, because we are all these actors are structurally connected worldwide, and they are also communicatively connected worldwide. And so we can now zoom in and analyze different examples, for example, of politics, communication at the same level, right? Or, as I said, live word communication. So how do people communicate in student exchange, for example? Or we can look at different actors and ask about how do audience imagine the world based on their media experiences or their global media. I heard from Subekti that K-pop, for example, is now very much popular in Indonesia as well. So what do people do who turn to become K-pop fans worldwide? Do they interact across borders, right? Do they share the same understandings of a global phenomena? So we are co-oriented towards the same maybe pop culture phenomena, but are we really connected? Are K-pop fans in Indonesia really connected to German K-pop fans, for example, right? That's kind of a difference, although we might follow the same pop culture phenomena. Yeah, so that's my little tour through these three key aspects of global communication. So the different forms and modes of communication, the different functions of communication, and the different actors of communication that are connected in an interdependent way. And that leads us probably to understand that, globalization, global communication is still unevenly distributed. It's still a true, speed dynamic at several levels. There are global elites. However, there are also many domestic masses. There is some kind of global media, but there's also a lot of domestic media, and therefore that helps us probably to give a little orientation um, to share questions and remarks and considerations, and therefore I probably hand back to Zubekti.
Thank you very much, Anna, for that really, really thorough and also interesting presentation and explanation of your book on global communication. I think it really clear a little bit of confusion when reading the book. Perhaps some people lost in translation. Yeah, perhaps some people don't really understand the concepts that you employed, that you use in the book. And this presentation, I think, clarifies a lot of uncertainties when you read the book. And I also think it is really interesting how you picture globalization from, I would say, a realist point of view, not really too optimistic like the hyper globalists that you said, but not too pessimistic also. It is a process. I don't know if we really can achieve or realize a truly globalized world. Yeah, but and also an important point in your book that we have a different speed in globalization between systems and also life worlds. And even I think even if we sit on the same boat, like you said, in terms of connectivity, that the majority of the world of people in the world are already connected. Perhaps what kind of roles that we have is also different. As a worker, perhaps, who rowed the boat, or as the owner of the boat, or as the captain. Yeah, and I think it only means that there is always gaps and also discrepancies between people who are who have connectivity because they have different resources, for example. Yeah, so I leave it now to the floors to students who want to pose questions to Dr. Grune.
Yeah,
Please raise your hand. Or, you want to comment or add
yeah,
something,
yeah,
please?
exactly. Because to just fill in the gap, as everyone might want to consider a question, it sometimes take a little bit of time. But what you said, I just want to have a little follow up on that,
Yeah.
because you mentioned it, of course. This is not to blame individuals, for example, to not being that global, right? As we know that we do have different resources and we look at things from totally different positions. Which we need to consider and understand. However, what we discuss quite a lot here, both in our master's program, also in our research, is that we need to understand the responsibility of the systems, right, to provide balanced knowledge about the world. So that's why I mentioned also maybe the school curricula and especially the mass media, right, to provide the knowledge we need to mutually understand one another. And that's why we deal so much with the problems of sharing or reproduce stereotypes in the media. For example, there are these many subconscious stereotypes of looking at specific parts and groups in the world. And here I think it's really a responsibility of journalism, not only of course of ourselves as well, but also the systems, right? Journalism, politics, to provide this knowledge, as not everyone can gain these experiences oneself, right?
Yeah, I think if you think about while waiting for the questions, if you think about a digital divide, for example, right, not only between countries but also within countries. Indonesia has been said we have already, I don't know, more than 80% internet penetration. Yeah, but look at the gaps between rural and also urban connectivity, between men and women, between people who have, economic resources and educational differences as well. Yeah, that could lead to different speed of globalization or interactivity as well, right? So I think from the realist point of view in looking at globalization, we cannot really just take for granted that globalization is happening. yes, it's happening. Perhaps we could also look at globalization, perhaps also, decreasing in some way or another, right? Mhm. And you also mentioned in your book about the system and life work and network approach. Perhaps you can explain or explore a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. When we started the book, we thought, okay, we should include thinking about these layers of actors, right? Because it's on the one hand, if we discuss systems and their interconnection, that looks very much different from that of, as I explained, the individuals, right? So as they follow different um, um, dynamics and logics.
Logic.
Exactly. So a system has a different logic than we in our everyday lives. So therefore, it's an attempt to take account of these different forms of actors. That's why we said, okay, it's a systems, a networks life word approach. And of course, there are also there is this network theory we tackle upon in the book, right? As we need to consider large communities or that are networked somehow, so they are not really individual actors in the life world. However, they're not bigger systems neither. So of course there is an interconnection between systems and life work actors as well. And this was our attempt to be aware of these different logics if we discuss global communication, right? To consider both systemic communication and also the live word actors and the taking care of the of somehow the networks without really um, only looking at everything from a network theory approach, as there are still very much organized systems and non-organized actors as well, right? So it's kind of a middle ground to position ourselves in theory here.
Yeah, interesting, because sometimes we separate networks, with the networks and actors, systems, and also life world. In your book, you said that all of the three are interconnected, and we should see then these dynamics of, interactivity and connectivity between people and systems from these standpoints, from this point of view.
Yeah, exactly. And we struggle somehow with the understanding of mere networks like Castell's network theory, for example. So, I mean, of course, there are relationships between these nodes, right? However, networks are not social systems themselves, and they are not individuals themselves, right? So therefore, it's an attempt to integrate. It's an integrative theory, I would say. So of course, we can't not consider the network approach, as there are relationships and networks. However, they do not exist just alone, right? So there are still social systems and there are still life worthy actors, so to say, and from a grassroots perspective. So this is maybe our attempt to integrate these layers of interconnectivity, so to say, in our theory. And we also discuss later on, we discuss networked communities, like, for example, Wikipedia. I don't know how popular it still is in Indonesia, but it is maybe one of a larger networked community across the world, right? However, if we dig a little deeper, we can analyze the individual actors acting on Wikipedia, and we can also discuss the influence of the social systems here. So it's not an entity we should only highlight. That's why we said, okay, it's our theory integrates these layers of analysis, so to say.
Interesting. Any questions? Please raise your hand. I'm sure you have prepared some questions.
And I would be highly interested in your perspective. So, what you probably experience in Indonesia in terms of, global connections, for example.
Yeah. Well, you meant you. Yeah, we have several. Two, perhaps first Najmi, and then Elora, and then Azahra.
Okay, thank you so much for the buttons. My name is Najmi from Communication Management in 2024. I would like to